Hey, if you're easily spooked or triggered, go watch something else. Just saying.
So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer, and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1 hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. I don't know what about, wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp, and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you hear footsteps, right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you, he was not there. Just us girls, like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama.
Whoa. Pretty scary shit. Probably some wild animal, if you ask me. 'Cause, those would have been a pretty gullible truckload of men. If that's the insinuation you're trying to make. But hey, let's not get discouraged. Maybe the next one will be spookier.
I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck, under my topper, next to all of my gear, as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning, I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I noticed that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long ratty beard, and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast. Nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer, but he just turns around. The dude is just standing there back to me, wandering around. I'm realising that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum. Motherfucker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately. He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away and I threw my shit in my truck and left that place right quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent.
I don't know. Not that I'd have liked to be in your situation, but come on. Just because the dude's homeless doesn't mean he doesn't have anything better to do than to watch you, as you said, all damn night, for no reason. I mean, you never know, I guess.
When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her, sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold, and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life, I have scary dreams that take place in their upstairs.
A fake wall sounds pretty sweet if you ask me, but sorry for, the PTSD. No child should have to go through that. No child.
While at uni, my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late on, so the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in was just row after row of suburban houses which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road, we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire and the lanterns which were dotted about gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so, curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there. Not just no people or horses, there was no field, just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road, as we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighbouring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night.
Damn, so it's like the whole weird party just disappeared. Guess you should have just stopped the first time you walked by. Oh well. Thanks for choosing not to drink and drive. What's up next?
4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues, but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing? Way?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed, and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper at outdoor, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back? I felt that. So I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over, my boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the fucking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house.
Now that is kind of creepy.
At the time I was around 14, I'd asked my dad to wake me up early that morning at about 5 a.m. because I had some work to get done. That morning, I was woken up, and I flung my legs over the side of my bed. I felt a tug on both of them. What I thought at the time was just my dad trying to get me to hurry up. I reached over to pick up my phone and turned it on. 3:30 a.m., and I looked over at the black figure I assumed was my dad, and it was gone.
That's kind of sketchy. I mean, are you sure it wasn't just your dad and he didn't just accidentally wake you up too early? Just saying.
Something similar happened to me. I was about 11 and I saw my dad standing in my doorway, staring at me at like 4 a.m. I was so confused because he almost looked mad. So I called out to him. No response. I blinked and he was closer. I blinked again, he was at the foot of my bed. I pulled my covers over my head and started screaming. Also, I don't know why, but doppelganger dad had boxers with flamingos on it, and when my parents came running to my room, he had on his Flintstone pajama pants. I asked, and apparently he does not in fact own flamingo boxers.
Come on, flamingo print boxer guy. If you're gonna go around scaring little kids in their beds at night, at least grow some cojones, am I wrong? If you ask me, these doppelganger dads sound like big wusses. I mean, they're always running off before you get a chance to ask them any questions.
I went on a road trip vacation with my boyfriend's family when I was about 16. His older brother came with us. It was the first time I'd met him because he was going to an out-of-state college. The first night we were staying in a house. I was on the couch near the door to the bathroom, and my head was in a deep shadow. I woke up startled in the middle of the night. My BF's brother came out of the bathroom, turned his head toward me, and then just stood in the doorway for several minutes. His face was in shadow, so I couldn't see it, but he stood there staring, completely still for about 5 minutes. Something about it felt very wrong, so I was laying there frozen, trying to hold my breath, just watching him. After a few minutes, I'd almost talked myself into believing he'd just fallen asleep standing up and I was overreacting. Then a car went by outside. When his face was lit by the passing headlights, I could see he was fully awake and staring right at me. He stood there frozen for another 5 minutes or so, then turned and went back to bed. I don't know what he was thinking, but alarm bells went off like crazy. I stayed away from him and made sure I wasn't sleeping alone in a room for the rest of the trip. Really disturbed me. I still get goosebumps thinking about it almost 20 years later.
Well, that's pretty disturbing, although I don't think it should still be giving you goosebumps 2 decades later. What I want to know is, like, didn't you tell your boyfriend? And if so, didn't he ask his brother, like, what the hell is up, bro? In fact, if it was so traumatizing that it still gives you goosebumps 20 years later, why did you even continue on the rest of this trip with Psycho Big Brother? My guess is maybe the poster took a bit of literary license. Or maybe she secretly had the hots for the older, out-of-state, college-going brother. You mentioned trying to hold your breath while he watched you. Well, maybe the reason he stood there so long, watching you, was to make sure you weren't dead. I mean, since you had stopped breathing and all. The weirdest part, though, to me, it's the way that you say a car drove by, illuminating his face, to the point you clearly saw his eyes looking right at you. So what you're telling us is that after your eyes met, and he knew you were awake and staring at him, he just stood there saying nothing for another 5 entire minutes, and he never brought it up again at any point after that? Well, then again, you never brought it up either. It's overall just baffling to me how easily this whole mystery could probably have been solved, and yet this chick apparently chose to spend her entire vacay just living in fear. Also, if you didn't tell anybody, how did you manage to convince the parents to let you and your boyfriend share a room when obviously they weren't going to be cool with that since night one? I know nobody asked, but frankly, something smells rotten in Denmark. Just can't really put my finger on it, but I can't help but feel like we might just be missing something here. But oh well. I guess that's actually going to wrap up this installment. And folks, those were the top-rated stories on the whole entire thread in question. So, I'm hoping you enjoyed them. As always, stay with us for more crazy stuff by crazy Redditors. Let's have a look at another batch now. Just don't forget to like and subscribe. I know you want to.